when it comes to individuals, the sunnah of dawah is to individualize the human being. And that means you come to him as a blank canvas and you understand who that individual is with his context. And that would make you realize what approach you may need or what means you will use to try and uncloud the fitrah. Obviously, this is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. And the reason I'm mentioning this, because it makes the dawah far more mature. And a lot of our du'at, I think, unfortunately, not a lot of them, but many of them, there is what I would call some kind of intellectual and spiritual immaturity when it comes to the dawah. Because sometimes someone will throw a question and it will be an intellectual question, but they haven't assessed the individual and they think, right, I'm going to give him a philosophical answer. But then they end up having a useless arguments and debates, right? You know, the famous hadith that we must give up useless arguments and debates, right? And the reason it ends up in a useless arguments and debates, because the guy's real issue wasn't a philosophical problem. Yes, he uttered a philosophical question or a rational question, but it was a veil, hiding something else that was going on. I'll give you an example. There was this atheist that came up to me, and he basically said, "Oh," and I'm paraphrasing, it was a while ago. An atheist came up to me and said, "Oh, Hamza, your argument for God's existence doesn't make sense, right?" And he was an ex-Muslim. And it doesn't make sense because causality doesn't make sense out of the universe. Now, with all due respect, we could answer this. We could say, oh, you have an empirical presupposition that you think causality is derived from experience, but we could show it's a priori. It's actually prior to experience from that perspective, meaning that you need it in order to understand your experiences. It's a first principle. We could go into metaphysics, blah, 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 blah. But that's just ego. That's just me trying to prove that I'm clever or that I'm right and they're wrong. Because when you give dawah, you should give up your ego. From the point of view of always want to be right, always want to look good, and always want to impose, right? Especially if you're doing it to the degree that you give up what's right and you give up the truth. That's what you don't want to do. So what I did was I basically said to him, what do you mean by causality? And our conversation ended at that stage by him saying, I don't know. And I said to him, because in Western metaphysics, the nature of the causal link, there's lots of ikhtilaf, right? Anyway, then he said to me, I don't know. And I said to him, well, isn't it very interesting that you're using a key term, a key word in a sentence to reject God? You don't even know what that word means. And then I tried to, be more brotherly or nice to him. I said, come, let's sit down. And after our conversation ended up a kind of existential spiritual conversation when he basically said, I didn't know how to connect with God because my parents were secular. Do you see what happened there? So he started with a philosophical question, but understanding his context and understanding this approach and trying to be intellectually and spiritually mature to realize what is really clouding his fitrah, it allows you to stand in the possibility that there is another thing that's going on. And that, I think, enhances the maturity of the dawah. And you see this when you look at lots of online conversations. They're really talking past each other, or they ended up just trying to prove a particular philosophical point and not trying to create awakenings with people. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he was a mercy to mankind, not only from the point of view to show that Islam is the truth, but he wanted people to realize that Islam was the truth. Those are two subtle different things, right? If you're committed to the well-being of another human being, which what Islam teaches us to do, love for linnas, what you love for yourself. It's hadith, Bukhari, Sahih, in Tariq al-Kabir. The Arabic is linnas, love for people, you love for yourself. This is not the hadith al-Nawawi. That's a hadith as well, of course. But it says, akhihi, your brother. Yes, and that also means brother in humanity. Yes, there is the Muslim brother, but there is also the conception of brother in humanity from the point of view that you're committed to the goodness and guidance. This is the explanation of An-Nawawi himself. An-Nawawi himself said this means insaniya. It can mean insaniya, that you're committed to the well-being, the goodness and guidance of people. Even the Maliki scholar Ibn Taqiq al-Eid said the same thing, similar stuff. The point is, if you're committed to people's well-being, you're going to start to think, not only do I want to prove that Islam is the truth, but I want them to have that awakening that Islam is the truth. And those are two different things. So you could be arguing in an abstract way, and you may have proven to yourself and proven to the audience, but you have lost that person because we weren't committed to their well-being. So I think it's important. I'm not saying, throw away philosophical arguments. I mean, I wrote a book about philosophical arguments here. I'm not saying, throw away the intellectual arguments, not at all. I'm just saying we need to be more mature. We need to be more aligned with the Quran and Sunnah when it comes to dealing with individuals. Because what is a human, man? What's a human, right? What is a human, for God's sake? We treat the human being in a kind of post-secular sense, like the human being is a functionalist model. In the philosophy of the mind, a functionalist model is what? Is you have inputs and outputs in the philosophy of the mind. Is the human being like a computer program? You give him some kind of rational algorithm and you expect some kind of results? The human being is not like that. We have adopted a wrong understanding of what it means to be human. Let's go to what Allah is telling us what a human is. A human is a dynamic interplay of